devastating earthquake in Turkey and Syria. It struck before dawn and collapsed buildings while people were asleep.
Desperation is now turning to anger as families living in freezing conditions wait for aid.
In early February, 2 deadly earthquakes struck Turkey and Syria. They killed more than 56,000 people and displaced millions of families. In the aftermath, 18 million people needed food, medicine, and other emergency aid. Sabri Gel decided to do something. He runs a restaurant called Baba Kebab in Adana, a city that wasn't too heavily affected by the earthquake. He wanted to help people, but didn't know how. A friend told him about World Central Kitchen, an organization that distributes hot meals to people affected by disasters. He took his food truck and drove 3 hours with some of his employees to Samanda, a town destroyed by the earthquake.
As Baba Kebab, we come from Adana. We're here to give people kebab, hamburgers, and bread with sausage. We produce and distribute on behalf of World Central Kitchen. Although we are a restaurant in Adana, we said, let's come and support.
We found people lined up in front of his food truck where he was grilling meat and handing out doner kebabs.
All of our products are made daily. I've been working here for about 3 weeks with 2 to 3 hours of sleep per day. All of our products are fresh. All of them are prepared in the morning and handed out the same day. There is not a single stale bread, all fresh bread. That's how we bring it. Also, our meat is always prepared daily. This is one of the most important things to us. And getting them to the right place, that's done by World Central Kitchen.
World Central Kitchen currently operates 7 field kitchens in Turkey, but at the early stages of their response, there were 11 field kitchens, 3 food trucks, and partnerships with 50 restaurants. Their model is simple. Respond quickly after a disaster by tapping into resources already available in affected communities, and without all the bureaucracy of a big aid organization.
Our work isn't designed to be long-term or sustainable. It's really designed to provide an immediate response and address the shock that the population has experienced.
That's Josh Balzer, Director of Humanitarian Relief at World Central Kitchen. He oversees their response in Turkey.
The faster we can get to people and provide them with their most basic needs, the quicker they can get on the road to that recovery. We don't need to conduct assessments or intense due diligence on the people that we're serving. And we don't differentiate between the populations we serve in a crisis because in the very early days of a response, everyone to some degree is affected.
World Central Kitchen was founded by Spanish-American celebrity chef José Andrés, a man with 2 Michelin stars and frequent appearances on late-night shows, elite cooking competitions, and front pages of magazines.
Please welcome José Andrés!
But today, more than 10 years after the founding of World Central Kitchen, travel to countless emergencies, and even a Nobel Peace Prize nomination under his belt, Andrés has become, for all intents and purposes, a humanitarian. And to my mind, his approach is shaking up the sector. Here he is speaking to a room full of senior humanitarian leaders at the World Economic Forum's annual meeting earlier this year.
That's philanthropy, and that's the business we are on in a way. It is the business we are on. Seems it's always about the redemption of the giver. When actually philanthropy must be about the liberation of the receiver. Doing good, people, I think you all agree with me, is not good enough. And we need to be in the business of saying, looking ourselves in the mirror and to say, we're not doing it as good as we could. Together, we can do better.
World Central Kitchen prides itself on its speed, agility, and willingness to take risks. Their motto is whatever it takes, and their model is based on mass mobilization of volunteers and working with local communities in a dignified way. For me, the rise of World Central Kitchen raises many fascinating questions about the changing nature of humanitarianism. Is this less structured, more networked, more relationship-based approach part of the future of humanitarianism? What about the well-trodden ideas of sustainability, accountability, and humanitarian principles? Is Chef Andrés' model a naive vanity project that can never replace the scale and professionalism of the United Nations? Or is it exactly the kind of community aid that will help meet rising levels of need? The truth is, World Central Kitchen has run into tension on the ground with the likes of the World Food Programme, thanks to very different styles and priorities. Can traditional humanitarian responders coexist with these emerging players? This is Rethinking Humanitarianism, a production of The New Humanitarian. I'm your host, Hiba Ali. This episode, we're straying from the topic of reimagining global governance for a minute to bring you an interview with a man who is, in many ways, larger than life. World Central Kitchen has become known in large part because of the dynamic personality of its founder, José Andrés. Here he is in some of his infamous videos on social media.
You know, I created a paella emoji. If you go to your phone, the emoji, boom. I am José Andrés, and today I am endorsing canned sardines. Nothing is more amazing to me than garlic, especially, if you are going for a date, maybe don't do it. Great, I didn't burn it. And if I burn it, I'm going to lie to you and you don't know.
He uses the same style when promoting World Central Kitchen's work in disaster zones.
I'm here in Syria, 20 minutes from the Turkish border. And in 48 hours, we have kitchens, we have amazing peppers, onions. Tomorrow we are coming with food for the around 600 people are around here. Avocado, bananas, sandwiches, water. We have the helicopter full. That's not bad. That's what we do. The community helping the community.
Instead of distributing bags of rice and tins of oil, World Central Kitchen works with local chefs to provide meals in line with the gastronomic traditions of the region. In Turkey, we spoke to Ali Yavuz, the head chef of the kitchen in Antakya, one of the areas worst affected by the earthquakes, where until today there's limited access to running water. But the city was also known as a culinary capital.
Today we're making meat stew. It's a classic Turkish dish, but it contains sumac, a regional flavor to resemble the taste of food people ate before the earthquake. We pay attention to cooking the dishes they make in their own homes. If you try to serve an unusual meal, maybe they won't be able to eat it. Everyone wants their own taste and to eat what they like.
Syria and Turkey are the latest in a series of responses to crises by World Central Kitchen since 2010. José Andrés' NGO has provided millions of meals to people in the Dominican Republic, Ukraine, and beyond. It's a relatively small organization compared to the big players like the World Food Programme. But its work is noteworthy because of how it stands apart from the humanitarian sector. In contrast to its bespoke, community-oriented response, formal aid agencies have grown into mammoth organizations. And as they've expanded in size and budget, the bureaucracy needed to ensure accountability around their operations has increased as well, throwing sand in the wheels of the aid machine. World Central Kitchen considers itself to be different. Here once again is Josh Balzer, the humanitarian director.
We take a lot of risk, and by risk I mean we're willing to make a few mistakes on how we produce meals or who we serve in order to serve the many, rather than designing a program that weeds out the 10% that we shouldn't provide to. We're willing to cover the 100% because 90 are eating in this case. We look at mistakes as a learning opportunity and not going to stop us from getting to that point.
Founder José Andrés is quite critical of the effectiveness of the humanitarian sector.
I come from the private sector. It's only so much money. It's only so much money in the world. It's so much money we can be asking to the rich countries of the world. It's so much money we can be asking from the big philanthropy of the world. And my question is, how much is that money? I don't spend much time on those things. I know as many of you are experts on this, but what is the money that government we give to UN, we give to small and big NGOs? What is the money? Because I have a belief that it's enough money to end hunger in the world, but we are not investing it in the same way the private sector does. Why? Because in the private sector we ask, what is the return on investment?
I met José Andrés earlier this year at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and I was struck by his style. Upfront, no nonsense, not caught up in being politically correct. You might call it a cowboy approach that has long been abandoned in humanitarian response in favor of the more structured, systematized approach of a big aid machinery that has sometimes become described as soulless. José says he treats his beneficiaries like guests at a restaurant. He speaks of the need for smaller, more specialized organizations that don't try to be everything to everyone and grow for the sake of growth. And he advocates for an approach where people feel they're not working for an organization, but for their own communities. Humanitarianism, he says, can't remain about throwing crumbs to the poor. I was intrigued by what World Central Kitchen style means for the future of humanitarianism. Sometimes the differences are very subtle, but if you pay close attention, there are a lot of messages for the humanitarian sector in this model. So I invited José Andrés to come onto the podcast and tell us a little bit more. He joins us today from Washington, D.C. José, welcome to Rethinking Humanitarianism.
Thank you for having me.
So you are a well-known chef. You own 31 restaurants. You have 2 Michelin stars. Time magazine included you twice on the list of most influential people. You were named Humanitarian of the Year in 2018 by the James Beard Foundation. You were even nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. I'm curious how you went from a chef to becoming a humanitarian.
You have to understand that watching emergencies, especially in America, that my heart was always kind of pumping, saying, oh my God, why I'm hearing that we are leaving people hungry sometimes? Why it seems so much hunger when there is so much money? Why in a moment like Katrina, we heard that we had thousands of people in the Superdome, forgotten, 4 days without food, water, and other needs. All those moments was what began building in me this thing of saying, if you send nurses and doctors to catastrophes to take care of the wounded, if you send search and rescue teams to take care of looking for people under the rubble, who do you think should be the most qualified people to do something as simple as this, to provide food and to provide water? I would say that everybody will agree with me that the best people will be people that are in the business of feeding people in the good times. But believe it or not, that same people, they have the know-how in how to do it in the difficult, hard times.
You've provided millions of meals to people in Dominican Republic, Ukraine, now Syria and Turkey. And we met, you and I, at the World Economic Forum, the annual meeting in Davos, at a session on humanitarian disruptors. So I'm curious, do you consider yourself to be a humanitarian disruptor?
I think I'm more a guy that goes and tries to learn and be of service. If anybody that helps a human is called a humanitarian, I think this is very good news, because around me, in every city, everywhere I go, I always see people helping people. You don't need to claim you're going to end world hunger. Just you can be helping a little child with his school work, because maybe their parents are not as prepared as you are, and you can help them and the parents. You can be helping picking up a piece of paper to keep your city clean. I do believe everybody that does anything beyond what is expected from them is a humanitarian. Therefore, I could claim that we are 8 billion humanitarians on planet Earth. Well, we need to make sure that everybody is aware and that everybody is even able to multiply the talents they have. Because I do believe we have plenty of talent in the world. Only we need to make sure people believe in themselves. Therefore, I want to believe everybody is a humanitarian. We need to tell the whole world, believe in yourself. Then we can solve many of the issues we are facing.
I don't think we're quite at the stage yet of having 8 billion humanitarians, but I like the vision. But I suppose the difference is that you didn't just do something as an individual, you created an entire organization, and you must have created for a reason. So the World Food Program exists to do very much what you do, to distribute food to people in crises. So where was the gap that you felt you needed to create World Central Kitchen to fill?
I will say that the organization created itself. And I think a very big important moment for me was Houston.
And Houston is one of the hardest hit areas.
Shelters are overflowing with evacuees.
Once inside, the Red Cross helps them get situated with a hot meal and dry clothes.
I lost everything, cars, I lost a couple vehicles, my whole apartment is flooded.
We arrived, few chefs from DC. World Central Kitchen was used very small with some projects in Haiti. But Houston was the place I went there. We already responded to some earthquake and hurricane in Haiti, a small scale. But Houston, for me, was an important moment because I was in the convention center in Houston, which was a very simply centralized location to provide relief to people that lost their home after the hurricane, or they were trying to escape the possibility of that massive hurricane damaging their homes. And I saw in first person how somebody made a call to shut down one of the biggest kitchen in Houston, which was the one in the conference center, and start cooking in the parking backlot behind the convention center. And my brain was exploding. I'm like, why we will not use the cleanest, biggest, most efficient kitchen with a chef that actually already cooked for previous hurricanes to feed the 10,000 people in the convention center, and somebody will decide, let's do a field kitchen in the parking garage. I remember there we opened a little kitchen that was donated to us in the Children's Hospital. We were able also to join a local chef who was doing an amazing, impressive work doing sandwiches and hot meals. And the amazing thing is that at the end, we couldn't use the kitchen in the convention center because, again, somebody that was not in the feeding business made the wrong call. We end cooking in this chef's kitchen and sending food to the convention center. When I began seeing things like this and knowing that we were leaving people in the perimeter of Houston City hungry, and already we had a very heavy hurricane season with other ones hitting, if I remember right, Florida. A few weeks later, just Maria happened.
The first pictures now coming in from Puerto Rico after taking a direct hit. The island is destroyed. Maria is the first Category 4 to hit there in nearly a century. 150-mile-an-hour winds ripping buildings apart, knocking out power everywhere. All of the electricity is out tonight.
And in the first plane that we could get ourselves on, we landed in Puerto Rico to try to help after the Hurricane Maria. And this is probably the true moment then that World Central Kitchen, focusing on food after an emergency, really began. Deeper than ever. Where the previous experiences were important for us to understand that, yes, cooks and restaurant people and food people are the most prepared people to overcome the challenges. And for me, it was amazing to land 2-3 days after Maria hit Puerto Rico, join a group of friends of mine, chefs in one kitchen, and we went from 1,000 meals the first day to almost 150,000 meals a day. We went from 10 friends to almost 2,000-3,000 volunteers. We went from one kitchen to more than 26 kitchens and 6, 8, 10 food trucks. At the end, we reached, I will say, almost 4 million meals directly. But I know because of our efforts, we kind of were able to influence many other people and organizations to do exactly what we were doing. The entire island is having a hard time. Everything is very much collapsed. Let's make sure that we all combine, do whatever we can. 10 meals here, 10 meals there. If many people do this, we can cover the needs in the short term of the island. At the end, this, I could say, was the beginning as an organization like has become. We don't go everywhere. We're going, hopefully, to be in every emergency where food and water may be a need.
So it sounds like organically you began very much in response to hurricanes and other disasters in the United States. And then over time, you started working more internationally. As you started operating in places that were more the traditional territory of humanitarian agencies, like the International Committee of the Red Cross, like the World Food Program, what did you come to see about the formal humanitarian sector? How would you describe the way it operates today?
Obviously, I will say that the very big organizations, I will say they have the bigger budgets, the bigger teams, and in a way, they are the official organizations that they should be taking the blunt and the leadership of responding to different catastrophes. What I can say is that the people that work in every one of these organizations, starting by World Central Kitchen and every other organization, for me, they are all heroes. They are all amazing people, and I know they put an amazing effort, sometimes with not all the tools at their disposal, and they do the best they can. And I'm sure the organizations themselves, organizational chart, and the people at the higher hierarchies are people with experience, and they are people that also they give their best with effort and intentions. But this is something about the very big organizations are not expected to have a return on investment like you will do in the private sector, which is what sometimes makes responses locally in America or internationally, especially when they are very big events, that there's a tendency to work by committee. What happens when everybody works by committee? That when everybody works by committee means that everybody is in charge. Heba, what happens when everybody is in charge?
Decisions don't get made.
Nobody's in charge. So we can expect a return on investment. In the humanitarian world, the people that we should be taking care of, like I'm a restaurateur, I take care of my guests. I take care of my guests and they pay. And they pay and hopefully they come back. Now let's go to the humanitarian world. Who are our guests? Who are the people we need to take care of? Are the poor of the poorest very often? Because they are the ones caught in the middle of those crises, because they have no ways or means to escape the tragedy very often. They have the worst homes. They may have no cars or ways of transportation, or they may not have money that they can go to a faraway hotel and put their families in the safety. Therefore, one of the biggest missing opportunities is that our guests are the ones that are voiceless. The people we need to be taking care of are the ones that are very poor. And we need to have a better response in the sense of we need to be there next to them as quick as we can, because usually when something very major happens, the system have a tendency to collapse. And I do believe that when something major happens is when the best of all of us has to show up to take care of every problem. Because the people, if they are going to be looking at the future with hope and hopefully start reconstruction and going back to their lives quick and fast, sometimes taking months or years, the quicker you provide the humanitarian relief, the quicker the people can start working in reconstruction of their communities, but more important, of their lives.
Are you saying that the humanitarian sector operates too slowly when you talk about nobody really being in charge and decisions taking a long time?
Correct. I will say speed were way too slow, especially in the big ones. I can say that Bahamas, I believe, certain things happen well. Through USAID and the U.S. Coast Guard, they send helicopters to do search and rescue. But at the same time, Ball Central Kitchen, very quickly, we were able to gather 3, 4, 5, even 6 helicopters very quickly. And we were able to do medical evacuations because we were going with helicopters full of food, and we were coming with helicopters empty. When the local hospital in Abaco will tell us, can you take somebody? The answer for us will be always yes. I think the humanitarian refugee crisis in the border of Ukraine with Poland, the international organizations, I think they were way too slow. Not by days, I'm talking by weeks or months. I do believe we need to have the urgency of now, when we're talking about humanitarian after hurricanes, earthquakes, tornadoes, tsunamis, all these kinds of events that nobody's expecting, and they destroy entire communities, sometimes even, I will say, parts of small countries. I do believe we need to have a better system, that we arrive quick, that we arrive fast, that we arrive with very clear missions and objectives, and where sometimes the very big machines of the big organizations are too slow to respond fast and quick to the very big events. And therefore, we need to start changing the way we are supporting and start using smaller organizations that are highly specialized, that everyone is good in what they do. They don't do everything, but what they do it well. So I do believe it's this moment that the big organizations, they need to realize that they cannot keep growing much bigger, that if anything, they need to be smaller, but very quick and fast and agile to solve the problems. Short-term in the emergencies, but then long-term fighting hunger and poverty. If the same organizations keep growing, but they are not showing us today real results, very clear moments in the history that use giving food in the wrong way only exacerbates the problem, makes the problem bigger, and puts more people not out of poverty, but into poverty. We need to make sure that everything we start doing from the moment that the humanitarian response begins, all the way to reconstruction and investing in development, that always we put the locals front and center. When you can buy from a local farmer, don't bring the food from outside.
When you can buy from a local factory, don't bring the food from outside. When you can hire locals to do the job, don't bring entire teams from the outside. Why? Because locals usually know best. Locals usually are more prepared. And it's very important that we start thinking globally, but very localized when we think about emergencies. Because the right quick response today will mean a better outcome tomorrow.
So you talk about the lack of return on investment in the international aid apparatus and the need to work with more specialized agencies that can be agile. What kind of success have you had as what I guess you would consider a small specialized agency in getting the formal humanitarian sector and to work with you in a more regular and structured way? As I understand it, there's something of a rivalry between you and the World Food Program, and they haven't always been very eager to work with you on the ground. So how has that gone?
We've been trying to do efforts on how we can really work together for each one's benefit. Obviously, you cannot do a lot without money. So money is important. Very often, sometimes very big organizations in big events, they receive a lot of money and they don't know how to put that money to work. That when it's an emergency, to me, it's very clear that people are sending you the money because they want you to take care of the emergency. If you are receiving money for a big emergency and you are not using the funds in real time, in a way, you are deceiving the people that are supporting you.
But are you saying that's what happens with international aid agencies working in emergencies?
I remember that also I spoke with the Red Cross. Red Cross America also was raising good amount of money for Puerto Rico. And I remember having this conversation when they said, well, we cannot help you because Puerto Rico is not a fundraising opportunity for us. Obviously, the people that said that is people I respect and know. And if I work in Red Cross, probably I would say exactly the same. This is not about the people, but this is how the organizations are created. That sometimes the funds are raised, but you don't have the systems and the ways and the means. For me, it was very surprising, very month later, when I was told that Puerto Rico is not opportunity, fundraising opportunity for us, meaning they didn't have money yet to help in a big way in Puerto Rico, even was one of the biggest disasters, that they already had millions and millions of dollars in the bank. The big organizations are still the big organizations. They are having sometimes, as much as they claim, hard time working with the local. And when I'm talking about emergencies, if you are not able to make quick connections with the local communities, the aid will always be ineffective. The aid will always last longer. And at the end, the people that lose are the voiceless and the poor. Therefore, I do believe the big organizations, I don't think it's the moment for them to grow any bigger. That still is showing us that sometimes doesn't know how to use the funds they have at hand. Therefore, more local money needs to be flowing into smaller organizations that can be best, can be quicker, can be faster, understands the nature of the local communities. And then when locals are part of helping locals, true change can happen. I do believe the big organizations like World Food Program should have a person that comes from Africa, or a person in charge, or a person that comes from South America, or comes from Asia, a person that comes from those communities that they are hungry themselves. I do believe the day we do this, then is when we can start using money smarter, better, and reaching the people that really are in need. Put people in charge that know the problems of those local communities. I think it's about time that US, as much as is the biggest contributor of money to UN World Food Program, I do believe it's a moment that we give the leadership to try to hope, to claim that we can end hunger in this century to people that come from these same hungry communities we're trying to help. Then and only then is the moment I think we can be achieving success.
And you would argue that World Central Kitchen uses that model even though it is founded by a Spaniard and run by people who aren't necessarily from the communities, but because it works with local chefs in the way it distributes the food.
If you see the early hours of our response in Turkey, and you see the response of World Central Kitchen a month later, you will not believe how we begin. We begin with no logos, with no branding in the cars. We begin just buying from the first kebab place that we know is good and grabbing food and taking it to the 2 first shelters in Adana. But you see, 1 meal at a time, 1 connection at a time, joined by the locals, listening to the locals, allow us to keep increasing the number of restaurants work with us, bringing food trucks from outside, joining to have warehouses near ground zero of the earthquake, which, as we know in Turkey, was a big one. In the process, because we allow locals to join us, is why locals make World Central Kitchen successful. Obviously, you need, in an emergency, people that come from outside here. You cannot expect that people and communities that they've been damaged by the hurricanes, by the earthquakes, by the tornadoes, are ready in the first day to start responding. Many people are suffering. Many people lost their jobs. So many people lost their properties. Worse, many people may lose family members or have them injured. That's why it's important that people come from the outside. But it's also very important that as much as you can, you start incorporating as quick as you can. People that are local but they live overseas and they join you, or people that are local and in the moment they see they are okay, they join you. We had them both ways. People that in the early hours began cooking with us, they lost everything. Like in Puerto Rico, many of the chefs that began the first 10 days were working 24 hours a day. Once our model was already moving, those chefs said, guys, I'm very happy we help, but I need to take care of my house. I need to take care of my restaurant. I need to take care of my life. But that's fine. They gave us the beginning, the push. Why? Because locals know best. They know what kitchens may be available. They know what warehouses may be available. They know what volunteer local organization of students want to join us to start delivering the food. Locals will always be best. That's why we all need to be thinking about how to incorporate them quick and fast and with real power.
Hi, I'm Lucinda Rouse.
And I'm Russell Hargrave. We are reporters at Third Sector, the leading publication in the United Kingdom for the voluntary and not-for-profit sector.
We're also hosts of the Third Sector podcast, a weekly podcast covering news and issues in the charity world.
Each week, we bring on expert guests looking at all aspects of how charities deliver their vital services in the UK and around the globe.
We also have episodes on charity management innovations, from how charities can get on TikTok to fundraising in the gaming and streaming world.
So find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or on the podcasts page of our website at thirdsector.co.uk.
So I hear you on the mobilization of the local community. I hear you on the speed and the agility. I guess what I'm curious of is the large UN agencies that you say have kind of lost their return on investment and aren't fast enough and aren't connected enough to the local communities. They grew into these big bureaucracies for a reason. I mean, they started at one point as small, and over time, in order to cover the scale of need around the world and to be operating in so many countries at once at the level that they do required a certain machinery to be put in place. So there's a reason that they have these long, heavy systems and the checks and balances, et cetera. And I think some would describe your approach, this fly in, quick and dirty, cowboyish, that also comes with some risks. So how do you manage those risks?
Correct. But we could argue that when checks and balances are in place and a lot of bureaucracy happens, a lot of money is also wasted in direct or indirect ways. We need all to have bigger risk tolerance. I'm talking about the early days, early weeks of an emergency. We're not talking about the long-term development and reconstruction support. And I do believe that having that risk tolerance, where the most important thing, what it is, and what I believe we've forgotten, that is helping people. We cannot leave people without food and water for weeks or months, or because you have to have the perfect machine with the perfect checks and balances. That's why in emergencies, I do believe it's in the best interest of everybody that is part of, just to go quick and fast and to manage the risk tolerance.
But there were days that the aid sector would kind of hop on the back of a truck and go into the bush with rebels and, this kind of adventurous spirit that I think you also represent. But since then, the humanitarian sector has spent decades trying to improve its effectiveness, set standards, be more accountable, be more professional. And I guess you would argue they've gone too far in that direction. But what would you say to those who see your approach as kind of throwing those years of learnings and improvements out the window? Whether you like it or not, I think you are seen as doing celebrity humanitarianism, which comes under criticism often for being vanity projects that are more about personality than about professionalism. So it is a balancing act, isn't it?
Yeah, I will agree with you on that perception. Obviously, I think the people that have seen me at work and I work with, they see that it's anything but vanity. If I go, it's because I keep learning. The question you asked me, if they have all these structures that they are so perfect and so rigid, because they need to make sure that they count for every dollar, they need to make sure that the response is perfect, that nothing happens and nothing goes wrong. It takes so much time to get to this perfect moment that then what is wrong is that we are not acting with the urgency of now. And so that's why I do believe that in this new model, as we see that there's more hurricanes, more typhoons, more tornadoes, and therefore the quickness and how fast we react has to change at every level. What is the message? What are we trying to do? We are trying to provide food and water to the people. And you empower that message to everybody that is involved, and you give them all the control of making that happen. Not creating organizations that they are so highly pyramidal, but organizations that are in a structure much flatter, where everybody knows their mission, everybody has a role, but the number one above mission is let's provide to the people in need what they need now. No week and no month. So all of you are describing that we need bureaucracy, that we need systems. This is all great if we put into the frame the people that we need to help. If at the end we are having the perfect warehouse, having the perfect response, all the people in place, takes us weeks to do that, versus being next to the people today, listening from them in real time what they need, coming back every day. Cannot be this humanitarian response that you drop MREs one day, you check them on a list, and nobody ever shows up to that community. I do believe in order to achieve that, we need to be quick, fast, and bureaucracy needs to be less. And the most important is, are we helping the people? If the answer is no, we're failing them. Therefore, we need to find the balance between having the systems and helping the people. But helping the people has to be always above everything else.
You talked about the rising needs, and for me, that's exactly what this is about. It's not about World Central Kitchen or WFP, but about the fact that there are now exponentially more needs around the world than there were even 5 years ago, let alone 50 years ago. If the humanitarian sector, or anyone really who's interested in helping people, has any chance in achieving that goal, it's really useful to my mind to be examining these different models and seeing what works best. And I guess on that point, my question would be, how do you know that what you're doing is working and is having a greater return on investment than the more traditional aid models? And to give you a bit of context, we spoke to a UK-based organization that tries to build learning and accountability in the humanitarian sector called LNAP. And we asked them their thoughts on the pros and cons of humanitarian actors who operate outside of the formal system. So here's Alice Obrecht, who's head of research and impact there, with her thoughts.
So we know there's a lot going on outside the international humanitarian system to support people affected by crisis. And that ranges from volunteer-driven, so-called global citizen-type efforts to local neighborhood volunteer initiatives within the communities themselves, as well as support from diaspora groups, local private sector, and from churches, mosques, and other faith institutions. At LNAP, for our State of the Humanitarian System report, we've really tried to capture and understand this a bit better. But because these activities are, by definition, outside any formal coordination or funding mechanism, that's made them really difficult to track or for us to understand their size and scale, let alone actually understand if they're being effective. Few, if any, of these efforts undertake evaluations of their work, and if they do, these evaluations aren't being shared publicly. Now, that, of course, doesn't mean that they're not adding value, but it does mean it's hard to have this discussion in any kind of evidence-based way.
So, Jose, I guess my question to you is, how do you know if World Central Kitchen is effective? How do you measure that effectiveness, and how are you accountable?
This is a very fair
comment and assessment by this organization, but I'm going to do like if I'm talking to them and arguing back to them. I've been in meetings of very big organizations with a very big spread Excel sheet. I've seen a spreadsheet that will have kilos, pounds, pallets, cambros, trays, because that's the way every other organization can measuring the way they deliver food. And at the end, if you know about the Excel spreadsheets, what happens when you put different numbers and different forms and mathematics into an Excel spreadsheet, that you will have something like says error. And these are official organizations. Now let's go back to us, the smaller organizations like World Central Kitchen. I think better information systems are very necessary. We very often in World Central Kitchen, in big emergencies, we keep putting the numbers in real time of how many partners we have, how many tracks. Sometimes we share how much money we raise. Sometimes we share how many meals we're doing every day. Often, we don't shy from sharing those numbers in real time. Now, how do we can have verification when an emergency has ended and we can show results and just start putting numbers to numbers? Money was raised, money was invested, meals were delivered. That World Central Kitchen, as we are still a young organization, will be better and better year to year in sharing that data that will show in real time what we do. If we are delivering food by helicopter in the north of Bahamas, did we do it because it was a vanity? No, we did it because we didn't have fuel. And we do use helicopters because it was impossible to do it by boat, because we had to feed every day.
And so effectiveness is obvious in a sense.
You know, the areas that are always forgotten are the very remote areas. When you put a lot of remote areas together, comes down to thousands, if not tens of thousands, of hundreds of thousands of people. Very often, the big organizations are in the area that they are easier to reach for a lot of reasons, and it's good that they do the big. But like happened in Houston, that we took care of the convention center, but many of the remote communities were kind of forgotten. I do believe that that's part of what World Central Kitchen does.
But actually, you're present in a lot of the high-profile emergencies like Ukraine and Turkey, not as much in the forgotten crises like in the Horn of Africa. So how do you decide what to prioritize and where the needs are greatest?
I will agree with that, but you will agree with me that those are major events. Turkey is a major event. It requires everybody. We've been in Indonesia where we didn't see any journalists. We've been in tsunamis and earthquakes. We've been in Mozambique. We had one member partnering with local NGOs, supporting them with know-how and money in parts of Syria that we didn't see many journalists or anybody. So, I didn't see anybody showing up in Providencia. The government of Colombia took good care of that one. And this was a very far away and remote island of only 8,000 people. But I will say that we show up in many other events that nobody is even writing about it, and we have no clue in Europe or in America that is happening, and men and women of World Central Kitchen is there. But at the same time, we also need to understand we're a small organization. I don't know the number, but I think the organization has around 70, 80 people on payroll. But the amazing thing, and this is part of what World Central Kitchen does, is that we are able to go from an organization of 70, 80 people with everything, accounting, human resources, everything, that actually our team for humanitarian response is the one that has to increase because the team is overworked with so many events. With such a small organization, nobody can be expecting Hiba that we are in every single one of them. What you are describing in the Horn of Africa, you could say is also war. I would say it's just more long-term humanitarian hunger issue. We are not yet. We may become one day, or I may join another organization, but we are emergency food and water. I keep saying NGOs cannot see every opportunity we have to serve as a way to prove what we are worth. Because if every organization thinks we're going to get in every single business of the humanitarian work, we are overextended, and then we don't become good at any one thing. We are able to go places quick and fast because we use local hardware in the places we are. We own some hardware, meaning we have some food trucks here and there. We have some things we own, but we're an organization that we are more about software. What can we use that is local? What assets can we use that is there? But we are not a fighting hunger organization. Long term, we are an emergency relief organization. When everybody forgot about Hamas a few weeks after Dorian, the men and women of World Central Kitchen were still there helping in communities, forgotten by everybody, far away, and helping Haitians, forgotten in the heart of Haiti. The long story is that World Central Kitchen men and women, yes, they are in places that they are not the ones in the news, but actually World Central Kitchen helps bring the news forward of those forgotten communities that they need everybody to keep supporting, from governments to NGOs like ours, because if not, these people will never make it.
You talk about being a voice that can bring the stories, those forgotten communities in particular, to the world. And a lot of that is linked to your star power. Your connections have certainly helped provide this kind of relief. You were able to raise $100 million from Jeff Bezos. You have the singer Pharrell Williams as an advisor. And so you've really been able to mobilize support thanks to who you are. How much of the organization's success is tied up with you personally, do you think? Does it have a future without your personal star power?
Yeah, obviously, I will say that the organization has a huge future without me because it has always been bigger than me from the beginning. Obviously, yes, I put my voice, my time, my social media, that I use it more, 90% more for this than for my own private business. But what I'm amazed is that if José Andrés is not there with boots on the ground, is many other men and women that they are there too in many places at once. Therefore, offshore is a World Central Kitchen without José Andrés. That's why I didn't call the organization José Andrés. I call the organization World Central Kitchen, and as I said, this is an organization that belongs to everybody. Everybody can make them theirs. That's why so many chefs, they always love to join us. Why so many people locally, they always love to join us, because they feel they are not working for an organization. They are working for their people. This is the very big distinction between us and others.
I just have one final question for you. We've talked about, I think, both the pros and cons of the approach that World Central Kitchen embodies. And again, for me, this isn't just about WCK, but about this broader landscape in which humanitarian needs are skyrocketing. It's becoming harder and harder to meet those needs. What do you see as the way forward? What's your vision of how the world can best respond to this era of crises, given, the different models we've talked about? How does the world get out of this?
The world spends roughly, the numbers vary, and if we do an average over the last 10 years, around 2.3, 2.7 trillion, and maybe it's more, dollars in defense, in weapons, in military. 2.7 trillion. That if we'll put a very small percentage of those trillions of dollars that go for weapons and armies, we'll just put them to invest in lifting people up from poverty and extreme hunger. That will be something fascinating, and I think can happen.
So it's just a question of money for you?
Money is important because money funds the actions of the people and the goods that you need to provide for people. And we could argue, do we throw money at the problem or we invest in the solutions? If we keep making humanitarian work, one that we are throwing the crumbs to the poor versus one that gives the tool to the poor to be lifted up from that total poverty, forever, we're going to be in the business of being humanitarian because it's actually a fairly money-making system. If US and Europe donate every single leftover food they don't need to the poor countries, we'll always forever keep those poor countries in total poverty and total hunger. And those people forever and ever will need the crumbs of the richer countries to survive. We need a big policy mentality change. We need a major global food center, which I hope I will be part of creating. which we will start creating a smart policy that becomes a smart politics for every country, and then all the countries thinking globally. Food needs to be seen as a national security issue. Every president of every country must have a national food security expert next to them. Why? Because every food decision we make, we think that only has to do with going to fancy restaurants and what is in our supermarkets and in our shelves. But we see that every food decision we make has huge input in global warming, has huge input in the way we use our water sources, has huge input in how we are contaminating our waterways in the way we produce food, has huge input when the people that are working the farms of every rich country are undocumented, that they are treated close to being slaves. How is possible that the people that feed humanity sometimes feels they are not able to feed themselves? When food right now is becoming energy, not the most important energy in the world, which is food to feed humans. But right now, food prices are competing with energy prices because we know some crops like corn and others are used to produce energy to move machinery or cars or other things. At the end, how do we fix this? Is by having a very clear understanding of the value of food. Because at the end, that's what Walls and Dragicean is, of food in communities, in the world, in who we are. And until we don't have governments saying clearly that food is going to be the most important resource on planet Earth, until we don't give that importance that food deserves, food forever will always be part of the problem versus food becoming once and for all part of the solution.
Jose, thanks so much for joining us on Rethinking Humanitarianism.
Thank you very much for having me.
If you've got thoughts on this episode, do share them with us. How does this model of fast, volunteer-driven aid compare to the more formal aid structures? Are they the ways of the future or of the past? What are the pros and cons? Write to us or send us a voice note at podcast@thenewhumanitarian.org. And look out for an upcoming episode in which we'll try to run some of the ideas we've heard on the podcast about reimagining global governance past folks who can tell us whether they have any chance in hell of ever being implemented. And then we'll be back with a new season of Rethinking Humanitarianism later this year. In the meantime, do subscribe to the New Humanitarians podcast feed, as we'll keep sharing events and maybe even some new podcast series. Today we'll leave you with a few thoughts from Robert Opp, former head of innovation at the World Food Programme. In 2019, the New Humanitarian hosted an event about new players entering into humanitarian work. And at that event, Opp speaks about how those new players can work collaboratively with more traditional responders, but he also warns that these new players need to respect humanitarian principles if they're going to work in this space. To watch that whole conversation, look for the link in the episode show notes at thenewhumanitarian.org/podcast. This podcast is a production of The New Humanitarian. This episode was produced and edited by Marta Vanderwolf, with additional reporting from Ingrid Waldwag, original music by Whitney Patterson, and I'm your host, Hiba Ali. Thank you for listening to Rethinking Humanitarianism.
The fundamental premise or the fundamental context is that we are not able to reach everyone that we need to reach. And so we know that as traditional actors, the reach and the answer is not just making us a huge amount bigger. We do need more entries, more people working in this space. We need the expertise of other players in the system to work with us. The one thing I would say is, and I haven't heard a lot of so far, is multiplicity of players is a good thing, but humanitarian principles need to stay universal. And so we do need to kind of agree that if others are coming into this space, there is a certain principle layer that we should agree on before we are just doing anything that we want to do in this space.